Good evening. My intention here is not to describe, not to trace a journey with God, what it could all mean today, but I just want to point out three ideas which could mean a contemplative approach for today. Today, we have a feeling that humanity is going through very uncertain times, politically, economically, morally, and intellectually. Even religions that are supposed to provide genuine anchorage for human existence, so it would seem, have deserted man to his own devices in his search for direction and meaning. As religions everywhere become politicized and commercialized and abdicate their roles as genuine forces for peace and liberation in the lives of individuals and in the world, it is no wonder that a lot of people today feel estranged from religions and spiritually orphaned. If this was already the situation, bemoaned by thinkers and philosophers of the 20th century, the feeling we have today is that of a diffusion and aggravation of that same situation. To speak about a contemplative approach in religious life possible today means, to my mind, first and foremost, to speak about a necessary recovery of the original ground in which all genuine religions stand rooted, from which they draw their nourishment. And this is no other than a profound experience of God, which is felt, named, and described in a multitude of ways. If to use the word God in this case is to be partial to its description as given by religions in general and by some religions in particular, there are certainly other modes of referring to it, namely as the experience of transcendence, of the sacred, of the real, of the ultimate, of truth. Or if you care for expressions that are somewhat unfamiliar to the Western and Christian ears, this original experience at the heart of religion may be called the experience of Bodhi, of Satori, of Tao, or Brahman, etc. A contemplative attitude of opening ourselves to the truly real, and expressing it in human words is what we sense in the poetic compositions of the Vedic seers. A deeply meditative experience of having grasped the ultimate truth about human existence is what lies at the heart of Buddhism. Again, the many solitary nights spent in prayer and meditation in the cave of Hira by Muhammad will be for Muslims the beginning of the Quranic revelation. Though an original contemplative experience of transcendence is invariably present at the core of all religious traditions, the possibility of such experience is by no means a reserve of religions. As quite a number of philosophers and thinkers have convincingly argued in our times, human being has a constitutional openness towards the reality of transcendence. A capacity for experiencing transcendence belongs to the very substance and structure of his being. A contemplative experience of God or transcendence, or what one might call it, is thus well within the natural capacity of man, though this does not at all mean that such experience, or at any rate some lofty stages of such experience, cannot also be seen as a gift from God. So, in contrast to what would have been normally the case in the past, when we speak today of contemplative experience, we have to reckon with all those reputed cases of experiences that have no strict religious adherence or affiliation. I am reminded in this regard of a book entitled God in All Worlds, edited and introduced by Lucinda Vati, a Catholic, containing an anthology of contemporary spiritual writings by a wide range of authors from different religions and from no religion at all. This contemplative experience is not unique to us Christians or to religiously minded in general, and that its possibility rests basically upon an inborn capacity in man to come into experiential contact with the source of his being is perhaps the most obvious thing that can be said as we speak of contemplative approach. This simply means that we are not alone on this road. There are other travelers, whose company as well as knowledge and experience of travel can be of value to us, as ours can be to them. Another point. A contemplative approach to God, possible today as it has always been, is evidently determined by the very nature of contemplation. A clear understanding of which is by no means as simple as we would like to think. More than 12 years after publishing his Seeds of Contemplation, which got an enthusiastic reception from the public, its author, Thomas Merton, would publish a revised edition of the work under the title New Seeds of Contemplation. And he would say, to refuse to use the word contemplation would have made the task of revision impossible. So while maintaining the word contemplation, Merton will be rather cautious in his new book about its meaning and use. So much so, he would add 2 new chapters at the beginning with such titles as What is Contemplation and What Contemplation is Not. Some of the reasons for this caution would plainly be stated by the author. As he says, contemplation is a misleading word in many respects. It raises great hopes that are all too likely to be illusory because misunderstood. It can become a magic word, or if not magic, then inspirational, which is almost as bad. Merton will go on to say that the difficulty with the word contemplation is that it can falsely sound like something, a spiritual commodity that one can procure, or it can give the impression of a project one can readily undertake, or of a course of action one can learn and teach, and which one's master can liberate him from problems and from unhappiness. While contemplation certainly is, to use again the words of Merton, the highest expression of man's intellectual and spiritual life, the difficulties involved in explaining it to someone who has not experienced it in some measure are paramount. I would leave out an example from the life of Buddha which would have illustrated this point. For anyone who has not had an experience of it, what contemplation is all about can at best only be guessed. Now, a token description in words of contemplative experience can be as followed. A non-artificially induced transformation of one's consciousness, accompanied by an encompassing awareness of the very source of one's being and the source of all that is real. Depending on the person's historical, cultural, and religious backgrounds, which seem to play an active role in shaping and defining the nature and content of his contemplative experience, this may be understood as the experience of God, of truth, of eternity in an instant, of one's true self, or it may be understood as an experience of God in the world, in the profundity of one's soul, and the world and self in God, etc. Of course, the religious and mystical literature is replete with examples of such contemplative experiences so as to not need any further elaboration. Now, the mutually incompatible manner of their description notwithstanding, what is actually difficult to deny in regard to contemplative experiences is the genuine conviction that goes with them as to their truth. Equally undeniable and indeed almost universally recognized by the recipients is also their reputed epistemological status as an immediate and intuitive comprehension of truth, well beyond the capacity of intellect or the possibility of faith. If we speak of contemplation as constituting a kind of knowledge, it has to be immediately added that it is actually a knowing by unknowing. Contemplation is not exactly a vision either, And if at all we try to understand it in terms of vision, it has to be said that what happens in it is in fact a seeing without seeing, or to adapt and adopt an oriental way of designating it, it is a seeing with the third eye. As we ask about a contemplative religious approach to God possible today, it may be useful to keep in mind that the bare description of contemplative experience we have attended right now. Although we can also readily agree with the fact that the term contemplation can indeed cover a wide range of experiences and that not all of them comply with the standard description. It may also be useful in this regard to keep in mind that what contemplation is not. Although the original contemplative experiences probably arose in the context of sacrificial cult offered to gods, and although also today the context of religious cult and rituals can easily turn out to be the occasions that trigger its onset, a contemplative experience is not in a way identical to religious cult and actions. Contemplation is not even prayerfulness or a tendency to find peace and satisfaction in liturgy, although these two can rather easily lead one to a state of contemplation. In general, contemplation is not something that liberates one from the difficulties and struggles of the ordinary day-to-day life, nor those of the spiritual life. Indeed, contemplation can sometimes even accentuate them. Contemplation again is not mere reflection of thoughtfulness and not at all a thing meant exclusively or primarily for people with a predisposition for passive and quiet lives. Indeed, contemplation itself is a higher form of action, and contemplation can never become an alibi for disengagement from the world of men in which one is called to live. A true contemplative can never really abstain from an unconditional commitment to humanity, especially to that part of humanity that is weak, wounded, suffering, marginalized. Contemplation and compassion are two notions that go closely together. From a religious point of view, what all this might mean, among other things, is also this. A person of contemplative experience can find himself at odds with, or even at loggerheads with, the official or the traditional stances and practices of a religion. Though this is by no means an inevitable consequence, the experience of many a contemplative has certainly been that. On the other hand, the service of the contemplative within its ranks is something that no religion can really dispense with. So, to embark on a religious journey of contemplative quest today will essentially mean placing oneself at the true service of one's religion and accepting the risks involved in going against its institutionalized and official forms, if need be. That this is possible on the basis of a freedom and conviction that comes from an intuitive awareness of truth arrived at in one's act of contemplation is what we learn from the lives of contemplatives. Third and last point. Contemplative experiences are unique to each individual, and yet there are familiar forms of them with which one can more easily identify oneself with. And it is in this sense that I would like to mention here Saint Teresa of Avila, the 5th centenary of whose birth falls next year. The Catechism of the Catholic Church starts its section on contemplative prayer by quoting Saint Teresa's definition of the same. Contemplative prayer, in my opinion, is nothing else than a close sharing between friends, and it means taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us. For Saint Teresa, for whom contemplation was also prayer, that would know different grades and levels, it is Jesus, and in Him God, with whom a communion of love and friendship is achieved in the act of contemplation. Though a great contemplative and a genuine mystic, Saint Teresa will be a person whose active engagement in the world of her times remains truly remarkable. She will almost single-handedly reform the Carmelite order in both its male and female wings and will found the first convents of the Sisters of the Reformed Order. Saint Teresa will also have her share of difficulties and problems with the old order and with the official church and its representatives. In all her troubles and travails, the source of comfort and strength will certainly be her contemplative experience of God. Saint Teresa of Avila would keep in her breviary a piece of paper on which was written in her own hand the following words, which served her as a memento. Let nothing trouble you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything passes, but God does not change. Patience achieves everything. To him who holds on to God, nothing lacks. God alone suffices. These are words that could have only come from a person who has had some of the lofty contemplative experiences of God and drew her strength and sustenance from them. A possible contemplative approach to God today should first of all mean for us Catholics having recourse to its familiar and proven forms as we find in the lives and writings of people like Saint Teresa and so many other Catholic saints and mystics. But this does not necessarily mean shunning all other approaches, insofar as they are only approaches and are understood as such, which help us in our journey into the mystery of God. The ground in which we receive the many seeds of contemplation that are daily sown in our souls can vary, and so can the manner in which we nourish and nurture their growth. But what cannot vary is the fruit they finally produce, and that is a life of transforming experience of God.